Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are opening the pantry door and looking at something that, well, I guarantee is sitting on a shelf in almost every listener's kitchen right now.
Oh, yeah.
It is, arguably the most common staple food on the planet. I'm talking about a simple pot of rice, specifically the mechanics of making the perfect pilaf.
It is funny you call it simple because on paper it really should be.
Right.
You have a grain, you have water, you have a heat source. That's it. There are no secret spices or complex machinery involved.
Oh.
But anyone who has actually tried to replicate a proper restaurant quality Turkish pilaf at home knows the truth. It is shockingly, frustratingly easy to ruin.
Oh, absolutely. It's the kitchen roulette. I feel like we've all been there. You follow the instructions on the bag, you lift the lid, expecting these fluffy, glistening, separate grains, and instead you are staring at a dense, sticky block of sadness.
Exactly. You go in wanting grain by grain perfection, and you end up with, like, bricklaying mortar. In the culinary world, specifically in the Turkish tradition, which our sources focus on today, that failure actually has a specific name. They call it lapa.
Lapa. It even sounds like a wet flop. Lapa.
It really does. It refers to rice that has turned mushy, gluey, and essentially lost its structural integrity. And the core message from the stack of sources we have today is that lapa isn't just bad luck.
Right.
It's not about whether the moon was in retrograde or if the stove likes you that day. It is a chemical failure. The sources argue that cooking rice is fundamentally a silent science experiment.
I really love that framing.
Yeah.
A silent science experiment. It takes the emotion out of it. So our mission for this deep dive is to stop cooking with our hearts, which is usually great advice for a stew or a sauce, but apparently terrible for rice, and start cooking with a chef's mind.
Yes.
We need to understand the starch mechanics to avoid the dreaded lapa.
Precisely. We need to strip away the romance and look at the molecular structure. Because if you treat rice like a simple side dish that you can just ignore, it will fail you. You have to understand what is happening inside that tiny grain when you apply heat and water.
Okay, so let's get the microscope out. If we look at a grain of rice, what is actually responsible for the texture? What distinguishes a fluffy grain from a sticky mess? What are the actual chemicals involved here?
It really comes down to two specific molecules, and the balance between them defines everything. You have amylose and amylopectin. These are the two types of starch found in every grain of rice, and they behave in completely opposite ways.
Okay, let's break them down. Who is the hero and who is the villain if we are trying to avoid the mush?
Well, villain is a strong word, but let's just say they have different agendas. Amylose is your structural engineer. Think of amylose as a straight, rigid chain. It doesn't like to tangle with other molecules. It keeps to itself. High amylose content means the rice cooks up firm, dry, and separate.
So amylose is the introvert of the starch world. It wants its personal space.
That is a perfect way to put it. It wants personal space. But then you have amylopectin. This is a branched molecule. If you look at it under a microscope, it looks like a bush or a tree structure because it has all those branches. It has a huge surface area. It loves to grab onto water. And crucially, it loves to grab onto other starch molecules. It creates a gel.
So amylopectin is the glue.
It is the glue. Now, if you are making risotto or pudding or sushi, you want amylopectin. That's what gives you that creamy, cohesive texture. But if you are trying to make a fluffy pilaf where every grain falls off the spoon individually, amylopectin is the agent of chaos. Lapa is essentially an amylopectin explosion where that glue has taken over the pot.
So the strategy for pilaf is managing this ratio. We want to maximize the structural integrity of the amylose and keep the amylopectin from taking over. This brings us directly to the first variable our sources highlight, which is the variety of rice itself.
Right. You can't just go to the store and buy rice. You are buying a chemical profile. Our sources break down a few specific types commonly used in Turkish and Mediterranean cooking, and they have very distinct personalities based on this starch balance.
Let's start with baldo. If you go to a specialty market or a Mediterranean grocer, you see baldo everywhere. It's big, it's plump, it looks impressive.
It looks beautiful. It's the jumbo shrimp of rice grains, but chemically, it is very high in starch, specifically that surface amylopectin. That makes baldo the diva of rice varieties.
The diva, high maintenance.
Extremely high maintenance. Because it has so much starch, it absorbs a massive amount of water, but it also releases a lot of starch into the pot. If your water ratios are off by even a tablespoon or your heat is slightly too high, baldo will collapse into a sticky mess. It's high risk, high reward. When it's good, it's creamy and amazing. When it's bad, it's paste.
Okay, so if baldo is the diva that might ruin your dinner party, who is the reliable friend? Who is the workhorse?
That would be osmanthus. In the context of Turkish cuisine, this is the gold standard for home cooking. It's a hybrid type, it's balanced, it has enough starch to be delicious and hold flavor, but enough structure that it holds its shape. It's forgiving. It doesn't punish you as hard as baldo if you make a small mistake.
That sounds like my kind of ingredient. I need that margin for error. And then we have basmati, which I feel like most listeners are familiar with. That's the long, thin grain.
Basmati is fascinating because it is naturally very low in amylopectin and very high in amylose. That's why it elongates when it cooks rather than plumping up. If your goal is tain, that's the Turkish phrase for grain by grain, basmati is essentially a cheat code. It physically doesn't want to clump.
So if you are terrified of lapa or you're cooking for a crowd and can't risk a failure, basmati is the safety net.
It is, and just to contrast, if you look at Japanese rice or sushi rice, that is bred specifically to have very high amylopectin. Trying to make a loose, fluffy pilaf with sushi rice is like trying to build a wall out of soup. You are fighting the genetics of the grain. You will lose.
So step one is knowing your materials. Don't buy sushi rice and expect pilaf. But once we have the right grain, let's say we're using osmanthus for a classic approach, we have to prep it. And this brings us to a surprisingly controversial topic, the great washing debate.
It is surprisingly controversial. You have the rinse until clear camp and the dump it straight in camp.
I'll be honest, I have definitely been in the dump it straight in camp, especially on a Tuesday night when I'm tired. Does it really make that much of a difference?
It makes all the difference. The sources are very clear on this. Skipping the wash is a one-way ticket to lop it down.
Why? Is it just dirt or hygiene?
It's not about hygiene, really. It's about dust, starch dust. When rice is milled in the factory, when they strip the husk off to make it white, the friction creates a fine powder of free-floating starch that coats every single grain. If you don't wash that off, the moment that dust hits hot water, it turns into an instant paste.
So you're essentially starting your cooking process with a layer of glue already in the pot.
Exactly. It glues the grains together before the cooking even really starts, so you have to wash it. But, and this is a big but, the sources also throw up a red flag here about overwashing.
I didn't know you could clean something too much. How do you overwash rice?
This is where the physics comes in. Rice is dry and brittle. If you get in there and start scrubbing it or squeezing it like you're washing a stain out of a shirt, you are going to crack the grains.
And a cracked grain is bad news.
It's a whole breach. A whole grain keeps its internal starch inside. A cracked grain leaks starch from the inside out into the cooking water. So by scrubbing too hard, you are actually creating the very problem you are trying to solve. You want to be gentle, swish it around, don't crush it.
Okay, so gentle swishing. Now what about temperature? I've seen people use warm water to speed things up. I've even seen recipes that call for soaking in hot water.
That is the second trap. The sources are emphatic. Never use hot or warm water to wash rice if you want pilaf.
Why? Doesn't hot water clean better?
In laundry, yes. In starch chemistry, no. Hot water starts the gelatinization process immediately. It makes that surface dust gummy and sticky right there in the colander. You are pre-gluing the rice. You want cold water. You want to keep that starch inert until it hits the pot.
That makes sense. Keep it cold. Keep it gentle. Treat the rice kindly, as one of the notes says. So we've washed our osmanthus gently in cold water until it runs clear. Now we move to the stove. And this is where the Western method of boiling rice and the pilaf method diverge completely.
Completely. In a standard boil, like you might do for a simple side dish in the U.S., you're just rehydrating the grain in boiling water. In a pilaf, you are building a structure. The source introduces a concept here called the starch shield.
The starch shield. This comes from the sauté step, right? Frying the raw rice in oil or butter before adding water. I always assumed this was just to toast it for flavor, like getting that nutty aroma.
Flavor is a side benefit, for sure, but the primary purpose is physical. You are performing a sealing operation in Turkish. It's called mühürleme. When you toss that rice in hot fat, you are coating the grain and subjecting the outer layer to high heat. This tightens the protein structure and creates a semi-permeable barrier.
It's like searing a steak to keep the juices in.
Similar idea. You are armoring the grain. This shield slows down the absorption of water and prevents the internal starch from exploding out too quickly. If you skip the sauté and just boil, the structure often collapses because the water rushes in too fast.
So how do we know when the armor is ready? Is there a timer? Do we sauté for 2 minutes? 5 minutes?
You can't use a timer because stove heats vary and pans vary. You need a visual cue. You are looking for the glassy grain.
Describe that for us. What are we looking for in the pan?
When you start, The rice is opaque, chalky white. As you saute it, the fat penetrates and the heat changes the structure. The edges will start to turn transparent. Eventually, the whole grain looks like a little shard of frosted glass or crystal. It loses that chalky look completely. That is your lock-in moment.
So if it's still chalky, keep stirring. If it's brown, you've burned it. You want glassy.
Exactly, you want it to look translucent. And that is the moment, and only that moment, when you add your water.
And this brings us to the math portion of our show. The ratios. The source calls getting this wrong the greatest sin.
It is. And again, this is where people get into trouble. They use a universal 1 cup rice, 2 cups water rule for everything. But you cannot do that. This goes back to the variety you chose. The more starch the rice has, the more water it generally needs to manage it. But it's a delicate curve.
Let's run the numbers so listeners can memorize them. For Osmanchik, our balanced friend,
The sweet spot is 1 cup of rice to 1.5 cups of water. That gives you the perfect hydration without drowning it.
and for Basmati, the low starch option.
Basmati is efficient. It needs less. 1 cup of rice to just 1.25 cups of water. It doesn't have the starch capacity to hold more water than that. If you give it 2 cups, it will be soup.
And finally, Baldo, the thirsty diva.
Baldo demands more. 1 cup of rice to 1.75 cups of water. But remember, because Baldo releases so much starch, that extra water is necessary, but it's also dangerous. It can easily turn into slime if you aren't careful with the heat.
Precision matters. Get your measuring cups out. Okay, so we've sautéed to the glassy stage. We've measured our water exactly based on the grain. We pour it in. Now, I have a habit, and I know I'm not alone here, of wanting to stir the pot, make sure nothing is sticking to the bottom, move it around, feel like I'm cooking.
And that urge is what the source calls the stirring disease or mixing disease.
It's a disease now. That seems harsh.
It's a pathology. Listen, pilaf is not risotto, is not soup. Every time you stick a spoon into that pot, you're creating friction. You are physically scraping grains against each other. Friction releases starch.
So stirring creates the slime. You are mechanically extracting the glue.
You are manufacturing lapa. The rule is incredibly strict here. You add the water, you stir it once to distribute the salt and the grains evenly, and then you never touch it again.
Never.
Not until it's on your plate. You have to trust the physics.
That takes a lot of willpower. It feels like abandoning the food.
It's discipline, and that discipline extends to the heat management. You don't just set it to medium and walk away. There is a thermal trajectory you have to follow.
The source talks about the visual of the eyes. This sounded a bit creepy to me at first.
It's a great visual, though. So step 1, you add the water and you want high fire. You need to bring that water to a boil rapidly to keep the temperature up. But the second you see the water level drop below the rice line and little holes or eyes appear on the surface with steam coming out,
That's the signal.
that is the signal to drop the heat to the absolute minimum, the lowest your stove goes.
Why the drastic drop? Why not just medium?
Because now the bulk water is gone. You are switching from boiling to steaming. If you keep the heat high, you will burn the bottom while the top is still raw. You need a gentle, consistent steam bath to finish the hydration of the grain's core.
And I assume the lid is strictly non-negotiable here.
The lid is the pressure seal. The fatal error is opening the lid to check on it. Or, even worse, the panic move. Oh, it looks dry. Let me add a splash more water.
I have done the panic splash. It ruins everything, doesn't it?
It destroys the temperature balance and the pressure equilibrium. Once that lid is on for the low heat phase, it stays on. You are flying blind. You have to trust your initial math.
Okay, so we have resisted the urge to stir. We've dropped the heat. The water has absorbed. We turn off the stove. Dinner is ready, right? Let's eat.
Absolutely not. And this is where most people snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. You have missed the most crucial finale. The resting phase.
The resting phase. I feel like when I'm hungry, waiting another 15 minutes is torture. Why is this scientifically necessary? Can we just blow on it?
It's not about temperature. It's about moisture distribution. When you turn off the heat, the environment inside the pot is chaotic. The moisture is uneven. There is steam trapped between the grains. If you scoop it now, that steam condenses into liquid water as it hits the cooler air of your kitchen. The grains bond together, you get clumps.
So resting is about redistribution.
It's about equilibration. But there is a specific technique here that our sources emphasize. It's the cloth trick.
Right, putting a paper towel or a clean kitchen towel between the pot and the lid. I see grandmothers do this all the time.
I think grandmothers are the original chemical engineers. They knew what they were doing. Think about what happens as the pot cools. Steam rises, hits the cool metal lid, condenses into water droplets, and rains back down.
making the top layer of the rice soggy.
Exactly. You get that mushy top layer. The cloth acts as a moisture trap. It absorbs that rising vapor so it doesn't rain back down. It creates a dry, humid environment that allows the rice to firm up and separate.
How long do we need to wait?
10 to 15 minutes. It allows the starch structures to set. Without resting, the source says the pilaf is simply incomplete. It hasn't finished cooking yet.
Okay. I can wait 15 minutes if it guarantees perfection.
Mm-hmm.
But let's play out the worst case scenario. Let's say I listened to this whole deep dive, I tried to follow the rules, but I messed up. I open the lid and it looks wet. It's mushy. Is it game over? Do I throw it out?
Not necessarily. The source offers what they call a kitchen pardon, a way to save the patient in the emergency room.
Give us the CPR for rice.
If you open the lid and it looks too wet, do not stir it. Stirring will just mash the wet grains into paste. Turn off the heat immediately, open the lid completely to let that initial blast of steam escape, then cover it with a fresh, dry cloth and let it sit. Sometimes just letting it breathe can fix a minor mistake.
And if that doesn't work, if it's really wet,
Then you have the nuclear option, the oven rescue.
how does that work?
You take the rice out of the pot gently and spread it out in a thin layer on a wide baking tray. You put it in the oven at a very low temperature, maybe 80 or 90 degrees Celsius, for about 10 minutes.
You're essentially dehydrating it.
You are forcing that excess surface moisture to evaporate quickly before the starch bonds permanently. Because you've increased the surface area by spreading it out, it dries much faster than it would in the pot. It can turn a disaster into a passable dinner. It won't be perfect, but it won't be lapa.
That is a great tip, the oven rescue. But ultimately, looking through all these steps, the washing, the sealing, the not stirring, the source seems to come back to a specific philosophy.
It does, and I think this is profound for a cookbook. It says, good pilaf isn't a show of force.
Good pilaf isn't a show of force. I love that.
It requires minimal intervention. The source says, pilaf listens to you. If you mess with it too much, it messes with you.
It's almost zen. It's about knowing when to stop doing things.
It really is. We tend to think that cooking or any skill really is about active doing, chopping, flipping, tasting, adjusting. But mastering pilaf is about not doing. Not using hot water, not scrubbing, not stirring, not peeking. It's about setting up the right initial conditions, the chemistry, and then having the discipline to step back and let the reaction happen.
The discipline of inaction. That is such a cool takeaway from a bowl of rice.
It changes the way you look at the kitchen. You aren't forcing the food to cook. You are facilitating the process. You are the architect, not the construction worker.
So let's recap our battle plan against lapa. Step 1. Choose your fighter Osmanchik for balance, basmati for safety, baldo only if you're brave. Step 2. Wash gently with cold water to remove the dust without cracking the hull. Step 3. Sauté until you see the glassy shield. Step 4. Get your ratios right. Math is mandatory. Step 5. Stir once and then never again. And finally, respect the rest with the cloth.
That is the formula. If you follow that, you won't get mud. You'll get that beautiful, shimmering, grain-by-grain pilaf that feels like a triumph.
I don't know about you, but I have a sudden urge to go buy a bag of rice and stare at it until it turns glassy.
Just remember, don't stare too close and keep the lid on.
Right. Hands off.
Exactly.
It really is satisfying to peel back the layers of something so mundane. It makes you wonder what else in our lives we're overcomplicating by trying to stir the pot too much.
Usually, the best results come from preparation, not constant interference.
Well, next time you were in the kitchen, try to spot that glassy grain moment. See if you can trust yourself to walk away. It might just change your dinner game. Thanks for listening to this deep dive into the silent science of pilaf.
Happy cooking.
And as you go about your week, think about this. We spent this whole time talking about how doing less makes for better rice. Where else in your life are you stirring the pot out of anxiety when you should just be letting it rest? Sometimes the best move is to put the lid on and walk away. We'll see you next time.